Hello, welcome to the Self-Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Chapter 6, Globalization and Social Change. No discussion on social change in the 21st century can take place without some reference to globalization. It is but natural that in this book on social change and development, the terms globalization and liberalization have already appeared in your earlier chapters. Recall the section on globalization, liberalization, and rural society in chapter 4. Go back and read the section on the Indian government policy of liberalization and its impact on Indian industries in chapter 5. It also came up when we discussed Vision Mumbai and the new visions for global cities in chapter 3. Other than your school books, you must have come across the term globalization in newspapers, television programs, or even in everyday conversation. You notice the various ways the term is used, but we still need to be clear about what exactly does the term means. In this chapter, we seek to understand the meaning of globalization, its different dimensions, and their social consequences. However, this does not mean that there can be only one definition of globalization and only one way of understanding it. Indeed, you will find that different subjects or academic disciplines may focus on different aspects of globalization. Economics may be dealing more with the economic dimensions such as capital flows. Political science may focus on the changing role of governments. However, the very process of globalization is so far reaching that disciplines have to increasingly borrow from each other to understand both the causes and consequences of globalization. Let us see how sociology seeks to understand globalization. We will recall our early discussions on the scope of sociology and the distinctive character of the sociological perspective. We go back a bit in order to focus on the significance of the sociological perspective to understand globalization. The scope of sociological study is extremely wide. It can focus its analysis of interactions between individuals such as that of a shopkeeper with a customer, between teachers and students, between two friends or family members. It can likewise focus on national issues such as unemployment or caste conflict, or the effect of state policies on forest rights of the tribal people or rural indebtedness, or examine global social processes such as the impact of new flexible labor regulations on the working class, or that of the electronic media on the young, or the entry of foreign universities on the education system of the country. What defines the discipline of sociology is therefore not just what it studies, that is, family or trade unions or village, but how it studies a chosen field. When you read the above paragraph carefully, you will realize that since sociology is not defined by what it studies but how it studies. It would be not quite right to state that sociology only studies the social and cultural consequences of globalization. What it does is use the sociological imagination to make sense of the connections between the individual and society, the micro and the macro, the local and the global. How is the peasant affected in a remote village? How is she or he connected to global changes? How has it affected the chances of employment for middle class? How has it affected the possibilities of big Indian corporations becoming transnational corporations? What does it mean to the neighborhood grocer if the retail sector is opened up to big transnational companies? Why are there so many shopping malls in our cities and towns today? How has it changed the way young people spend their leisure time? These are just a few examples of the wide ranging and different kinds of changes that globalization is bringing about. You will find many more instances whereby global developments are affecting the lives of people and thereby affecting the way sociology has to study society. With the opening up of the market and removal of restrictions to the import of many products, we have many more products from different corners of the world in our neighborhood shops. Since April 1, 2001, all types of quantitative restrictions on import were withdrawn. It is no surprise now to find a Chinese pear, an Australian apple eyeing for attention in the local fruit stall. The neighborhood store also has Australian orange juice and ready to fry chips in frozen packets. What we eat and drink at home with our family and friends slowly changes. The same set of policy changes affects consumers and producers differently. What may mean greater choices for the urban, affluent consumer may mean a crisis of livelihood for a farmer. These changes are personal because they affect individuals' lives and lifestyles. They are obviously also linked to public policies adopted by the government and its agreement with the World Trade Organization. Likewise, macro policy changes have meant that instead of one television channel, we have literally scores today. The dramatic changes in the media are perhaps the most visible effect of globalization. We will be discussing this in greater detail in the next chapter. These are just few random examples, but they may help you to appreciate the close interconnection that exists between your personal lives and the apparently remote policies of globalization. As mentioned earlier, the sociological imagination enables to make this connection between the micro and the macro, between the personal and public. Sociology has been often defined as the discipline that studies society. You would remember from your discussions in Book 1 of Class 11th that the boundaries of society are not easy to draw. A study of a village not only meant study of different social groups and their societies, but would also have to take into account the ways the village society was linked to the outside world. This linkage is more valid today than ever before. The sociologist or social anthropologist cannot study society as though it was an isolated entity. The compression of space and time has changed this. Sociologists have to study villages, families, movements, child rearing practices, work and leisure, bureaucratic organizations, or castes, taking this global interconnection into account. Studies will have to take into account the impact of WTO rules on agriculture and therefore on the farmers. The effect of globalization is far reaching. It affects us all, but affects us differently. Thus, while for some it may mean new opportunities, for others, the loss of livelihood. Women silk spinners and twisters of Bihar lost their jobs once the Chinese and the Korean silk yarn entered the market. Weavers and consumers prefer this yarn as it is somewhat cheaper and has a shine. Similar displacements have come with the entry of large fishing vessels into Indian waters. These vessels take away the fish that used to be earlier collected by Indian fishing vessels. The livelihood of women fish sorters, dryers, vendors, and net makers thereby get affected. In Gujarat, women gum collectors who were picking up from the fulfilled lost their employment due to the import of cheaper gum from Sudan. In almost all cities of India, the rag pickers lost some of their employment due to import of waste paper from developed countries. We will see later in the chapter how traditional entertainers are affected. It is obvious that globalization is of great social significance, but as you saw, its impact on different sections of society is very different. There are, therefore, sharply divided views about the impact of globalization regarding its effect. Some believe that it is necessary to herald a better world. Others fear that the impact of globalization on different sections of people is vastly different. They argue that while many in the more privileged section may benefit, the condition of a large section of the already excluded population worsens. There are yet others who argue that the globalization is not a new development at all. In the next two sections, we look at these issues. We find out a bit more about the kind of global interconnections that India had in the past. We also examine whether indeed globalization has some distinctive features, and if so, what is it? Now let us wind up the session, and thank you very much for engaging yourself with a self-learning podcast.